Hello guys, we are part 5 of 6 parts. So part 5 of 6 parts, we're on slide 96. Not that much today, but I started you off with something cool. So after studying the animations on this slide of the baby sea turtle and the hummingbird and the penguin and the fox, you were supposed to describe survival adaptations you see these animals exhibiting. So an adaptation would be what here? Ability to stand on the snow instead of sinking down into it, ability to jump, ability to hear a mouse under the snow. That's what they're going for. That's really what you're seeing is an adaptation that allows them to sense that creature, okay? Adaptation to moving faster along the ice rather than walking. Long beaks, flippers, ability to move on land and in water. You could keep going. There's lots of adaptations there. Okay, so what are the results? You've got this genetic variation in a population. What happens to the species because of that genetic variation? We know a little bit. We know species have a better chance of survival if they have variation rather than a panda bear that has little genetic variation and can adapt to the changing environment. So the major result of genetic variation is adaptation, right? Adaptation is any kind of inherited trait improving the chance of survival and reproduction of an organism. There seems to be some notion we keep coming across on every single level of this unit, and it's improving the chance of survival and reproduction. It's like the foundation of all these other little parts, Structural change. An organism's structure is a result of its evolutionary history and adaptation to an environment. So for example, you've got mountain goats. They have special hooves, almost like chisels, that they don't grip, they don't grab on, but they kind of, trying to explain, they're narrow, okay, that's one thing, and they can get into tight spaces and balance on them. So, I mean, this is where they live. They're not having fun or exploring here. They live on these cliff sides. And the main reason they live there is to escape predation. They've their species has adapted to being able to live in that environment. Polar bears with their black skin, this is if you remove the white fur, they have black skin underneath, which increases their ability to store, solar energy. Okay, that gets through the fur, and padded feet, blubber, thick skin, all that. So, and then specialized limbs for running, flying, climbing. The next one is functional change. Functional change is in an organism's biochemistry. So not just their form, but the chemicals that they make that aid them in survival and adaptation. So some snakes make poisonous venom and can even spit it. They wouldn't use the spit for predation. They would use the spit for protection, because they would shoot it in a person's eyes or a deer or something that was going to step on it, and that would blind the animal so that they could get away. Seems kind of overkill, but some serious biochemistry there. Spitting cobra. Behavioral change. Many animal behaviors have evolved because they increase reproductive success. Again, that's the whole point here, right? To increase that reproductive success so that their genes get passed on to the next generation. They don't know that they're doing this. As far as we know, humans are the only ones that understand that concept, but it's been programmed into their DNA since the beginning to make as many babies as possible. Humans know better. Humans know that that will be the detriment of the earth if we continue to overpopulate. But animals have a check system. I mean, the earth probably has a check system for us too, eventually. Don't want to think about that. But so you've heard of the word harem, where that is, you have one male and many females. Many animals do that. Deer, elk, walruses, sea lions, lions, land lions, members of the same firefly species. They find mates due to the time of day they search and the rate of blinking. All of these adaptations are behavioral changes. Territorial battles, we've seen this picture before. We've seen the giraffes swatting each other. So how do populations evolve? A whole population. And natural selection can act on only the individual, okay? It's about the survival of the fittest individuals. Evolution happens to a species. Populations, not individuals. So individuals do not evolve. We know this. And when I say populations, okay, let's imagine, we've had this before, you've got two species of giraffe. And then all of a sudden an earthquake happens and it changes the river flow, and the river now cuts through the middle of their territory, separating the initial first population into two smaller populations. Now, evolution can act on those separate populations based upon the changes that occur on the west side of the river or the east side of the river. This is a dingo. It's a link between wolves and dogs, and evolutionarily, and on the branches, branching link, not a chain. And they were separated out. They were their population was removed because Australia is an island. So when dogs somehow were brought to Australia, I don't know how long ago, dingoes developed from that population of wolves, of canines, I should say, not dogs per se. All right, a population is a group of individuals from the same species living in the same place at the same time. Kind of sort of just explain that, but that breaks it down into a concise definition. So here we have, that's why when you look around the planet, you see different types of people. Because before we had such world travel, people were stuck in their place of where their ancestors lived, okay, and evolved. And that's why you see people with different shaped faces, different colored skin, and different kinds of hair and things like that, because they were separated geographically for a time. Their populations were separated. But now it's all mixing together, which is fine, because we're all the same species, right? A species is a group of organisms and populations that can interbreed and produce fertile offspring. Fertile offspring. That's the key. Can a dog mate with a cat? I guess so. I don't know why they'd probably fight and kill each other before but nothing will happen. You see, they're not the same species. Even a lion and a tiger are very similar. They would not, if you put them in a cage, they would not mate. They'd probably fight each other to death. One of them would die. The other one might be so injured it would die. They might kill each other. They would not mate. Humans, however, because we're crazy, we can take the sperm from one and put it into the other and get something called a tigon or a liger, depending upon which one's the dad. If the dad's a tiger, it's a tigon. If the dad is a lion, it's a liger, okay? And you'll get this animal, the mother will have a baby, but the baby will not be able to produce its own fertile offspring. The baby is sterile. Same with a horse and a donkey. You want a bigger size to ride it, but you want something that can carry a lot of weight, so you want a mule. Well, then you mate, so you want the donkey and the horse together, you make a mule. Mules are sterile. Mules can't have babies because a donkey and a horse, even though they're from a similar ancestor, they're not the same species. But if you mate them together, man has to do it, and you get a mule, then the mule will be sterile. That's the definition of a species. I just really well defined what a species is and what a species is not. So remember, evolution occurs very slowly. It may take millions of years for a species to change enough to be categorized as a new species. So here you've got all of these animals that have an ancestor on their phylogeny tree, and they're all different species now. Even this, I saw one of these for the first time, not in life, in a video. No, I take that back. It wasn't a video. Well, it was a video, but it was live. It was a live video, and I thought they were foxes, and it was in northern Denmark. It was a live feed of a bird feeder. Well, not a bird feeder, of a stream in Denmark where somebody puts out food, and all these animals come all night and all day. Badgers, all different kinds of birds. It's really cool. Anyway, and one time I saw these guys, and I was freaking out because I'm a biologist and I know a lot more than the average person about different kinds of species, and I had never actually seen one of these before, and I was like, what the heck is that? So I looked it up, and it's called a raccoon dog. Isn't that weird? It's not a raccoon. It's not a dog. It's not, I don't even think it's related to raccoons. It's a canine in the line of these other ones, a different species. So what Darwin didn't know, he didn't know a lot, obviously. He knew enough to write a book and come up with the mechanism for natural selection. So, and when he made that hypothesis about evolution, we know this, we already discussed, he didn't know about chromosomes, genes, or DNA. He didn't even know how heredity worked. Like, Mendelian genetics with the P's and the Punnett squares and all that. He didn't know how that worked either. The modern synthesis of the theory of evolution connects Darwin's work with our knowledge of genetics. So here, like I said before, and I'm going to say it again, we're tying these two units together, the genetics unit with heredity and evolution, because it's obviously related, right? So is protein synthesis with the messenger RNA and the transfer RNA and all that, and the amino acids. So what is microevolution? It's evolution on a small scale within a single population. That's what we did with the moths. Any moths that are left behind in this classroom, they may be there next year. Some kid might find one next year because we never found it. So if your moth is not up there on the board, if your moth wasn't selected against by a bird, then you leave your moth where it is, because that'll be really funny. It'll stir things up next year in class. So you just keep your moth where it is. So that population of moths was a single population. Now you can imagine that other biology teachers, and I don't think any of them did this. Other biology teachers imagine that they did it in all of their biology classes, and so those were other populations of the same species of moth. Okay, So microevolution would be this population, evolution changing, evolution happening in this population, which we demonstrated. So it examines relative frequencies or the number of times an allele for a particular trait occurs in a gene pool. Now, we did study this a little bit in our online natural selection activity we did last week, but this is just a formalization of that, okay, in notes. So, here's the gene pool, so to speak. It's a swimming pool with brown and blue, not brown and blue, brown and white alleles in the frequency that they exist in that population. So if this was moths, it could be the black or the white ones, and this is our classroom or something like that. Okay, and then the different rabbits with the different genotypes and their phenotypes. Brown is dominant over white in fur color, and a population shares that gene pool. When you select individuals out, like we did with the moths, you are changing the population. That population will evolve and adapt to. Remember, an individual can adapt. It already has the adaptation in it. The population will adapt to the new environment. A gene pool is the combined genetic information of all the members of a particular population. So for example, a species of beetle, a gene pool would be a group of individuals that all live in a particular mountaintop and are potential mates for one another. So the potential to interbreed in nature defines the boundaries of a population. Imagine you go to the mountaintop for those beetles this year. Field trip, let's go to the mountaintop. The closest mountain, not hill, Florida, the highest point in Florida is 325 feet or something like that. It's like an 8-hour drive from here in the panhandle of Florida, right on the border of Alabama. I've been there before. Florida has the lowest high point of any state of all the 50 states in the United States. It has the lowest high point. Every other state has a highest point. So, but to get to a mountaintop, you have to go to at least Georgia, right? Northern Georgia, past Atlanta, north of Atlanta, west of Atlanta. So that you're talking about a 12-hour drive, perhaps 12-hour drive, okay? And you go there and you sample the beetles. You determine 80% of the genes in the population are green and 20% are brown. That's what you determine. You take a sample, you're just walking and you're sampling, or you're collecting them somehow with a net or something, a trap, something like that, something that's going to be non-biased. Your eyes might be biased because you're only seeing the green ones on the brown foliage maybe or something like that, right? So you have to do it scientifically. You can't think like a bird, you got to think like a human. Next year, you go back to the same exact place where the same exact population is and repeat your experiment, and you find a new ratio. Somehow, now they are 60% green and 40% brown. You have detected a microevolutionary pattern, a change in gene frequency, and that's what microevolution is. And here's a visualization of, these are actually, I think, different species, but you'd have to be doing the same species. So first year, second year. So what are the mechanisms of microevolution? How does microevolution work? So you have to have sources. What creates genetic variation? And again, we are looking at crossing over. Segregation and recombination. Segregation through meiosis, recombination through fertilization, when the sperm and egg come together. And of course, random mutations on the genes in the codons, the 3 and the 3 that meet together when they're making proteins, okay? So genetic shuffling, variation. The second one is natural selection. In order for microevolution to occur, this has to be present. And it virtually, always is. What does that mean? It means variation in traits, differential reproductive success. Heredity, meaning passing down genes from one generation to the next, and survival of the fittest. The reason that we're not filling out anything on this slide is because we know all this already. Gene flow, and this is called migration. So in other words, you've got gene pool 1 and gene pool 2. Some of these organisms go, oh, I'm going to fly over here just for random reason, and they end up in a different population. And so they have carried genes from this gene pool A, to gene pool B. And that's called gene flow. Any movement of individuals and the genetic material they carry, that should be they, T-H-E-Y, carry from one population to another. Example. So here's an example. Bald eagles relocated from Alaska to New York State were relocated because they wanted to increase the genetic variation and the survival conservation of these species. Why did they have to do it in the first place? Because humans are stupid. I keep coming back to that, don't I? Humans in the 50s and I think 60s, they sprayed this chemical insecticide, pesticide called DDT. D as in dog, twice, and then T as in Tom. DDT. It killed every insect. Birds aren't insects. What are we talking about here, Mr. Keene? Why are the bird population affected? And instantly you thought, these birds don't even eat insects, or isn't their food got taken away? Because the DDT was in the environment, it actually made their eggshells thinner. So thin that when the parents sat on the eggs, they cracked. No babies were being born. So what happens to a population when no babies are born? Plummets. And the only ones that were left after DDT was banned in the 60s or early 70s were not enough for genetic variation. And so they took some eagles from Alaska and they brought them to New York. That's about a 4,000, 5,000 mile trip across North America to help their survival, okay? And then, of course, another example is pollen being blown from one forest to another forest. You'd think that may be incredible, but we get dust from Africa, the Saharan desert in Africa, blown over the Atlantic Ocean to us in Florida. And if dust can move 5,000 miles across the ocean, well, pollen, which floats in the air, can make similar movements. The fourth one is genetic drift. What is genetic drift? It's the change in allele frequencies in a population from generation to generation that occurs due to chance random events. Random events. We talked about this earlier. You may remember, it was the video that we watched with that guy. You know, the guy with the glasses. Not me, the other guy. A random event. A random event is like you're walking down the street and with your friends after school, and you crunch some ants that are walking, have a trail across the sidewalk, and you didn't try to crunch them. You just were walking and you squished them and you kept going, and you and your friends killed about 100 ants. You didn't even know you did it. Well, you just like the moths, you took those the genes that those were carrying out of the gene pool. And you created genetic drift. And so random things like that will cause generation after generation to have a different allele frequency. And of course, the effect is stronger in smaller populations. Larger populations, you have more influx, more. Imagine you had 100 pennies versus 10 pennies, or 100 coins versus 10 coins. Those 100 coins mixed up would be, if you pulled out a couple of dimes, it wouldn't matter. If you pulled out a couple of dimes from 10 coins, well, that might be all the dimes, and now that gene is gone, from the population. And there are two types. We're going to talk about both right now: the bottleneck effect and the founder effect. Okay, so the bottleneck effect. It sounds funny when you say it fast. Most of the population is killed by some event. I don't know, a cold snap, tsunami, a virus, a bacterial infection, a warm snap, a drought, any number of things, okay? Most of the population is somehow killed off. Only the survivors and their genes make up the new gene pool. So you see how you can generate this as a bottleneck effect. So you're getting rid of all these, and only some of the genes get through. Only some of the genes are in the new pool. The rest of them are gone, wiped out. So the genes, they disappear. They can't be recovered, the ones that get wiped out. The genes in our moths up there on the board, they're out of the gene pool. So most of the population is killed in some event. With the moths, it could be us for that 5 minutes when we were searching around the classroom to find moths. That was the event. It was a predation event. Maybe it was a migration of predators, a migration of orca whales coming through a certain community, and they wiped out most of the population, leaving only a small part left. That's an example of bottleneck effect, genetic drift. Another example, elephant seals have reduced genetic variations because of excessive hunting. Again, humans not thinking past their wallet, okay? So hunting reduced their population to as few as 20 individuals. Can you imagine? Something comes by through the solar system and wipes out all the human Earth, and there's only like 100 people left. That's similar situation. Could we come back? Could the species come back from 100 individuals? Yes. But it's scary. It's scary, okay? So due to conservation efforts, their population has rebounded to 30,000, but their genes still carry the marks of this bottleneck. There's not too much variation in their population. Will it come back over time with mutations? Yes, but a lot longer than 140 years ago, or 30 years ago. Second example is right here in our state, Florida. Due to hunting, again, stupid humans, Florida panther population was reduced to less than 50 adults in the 1980s. Even now, there's not many. They don't reproduce very quickly. And they're very aloof. They have huge areas that habitats that individuals will live in. They're not like pack animals, like wolves, that can stay together. And they're very territorial, secretive, and people still hit them with their cars. Driving too fast on the highway, driving too fast at night. If you drive down in the Everglades, which is not far from here, you'll see signs that have a differentiation between night and day speed. In the daytime, when you can see better and react faster, your speed is a little higher. They lower the speed at night and these animals are typically nocturnal, and that's why you have to drive slower. But there are people who ignore those, and every once a year at least you get somebody hitting one of these amazing creatures. So the result are congenital heart defects. That means they're born with heart issues. Hole in the heart, low sperm counts or abnormal sperm. Abnormal sperm don't make offspring. They don't even get to where they need to go. High frequency of something called a kinked tail. Not a picture here, that may be it, but it's almost like their tail is supposed to be, like this. It's kinked like that on the end. And that's just a mutation that's spread through the population because the gene pool is so small. And of course, very little genetic variation. So if something goes wrong, the whole population could get wiped out. They used to be all over the state, but of course, people hunted them to virtual extinction. It's very sad. And the second one for genetic drift was founder effect. This is when a new population is started with a small number of individuals. So Galapagos Islands, when those small number of individuals came over to the Galapagos Islands, however they got there, we may never know, because it was before humans were involved in any of that stuff. They say a storm or floated over on a raft, not a raft meaning man-made raft, but like a log with some twigs, that's what they're called. Polydactylism, extra finger or toe in Amish population in eastern Pennsylvania can be traced back to one couple who immigrated in the area in 1744. No, that is not the couple. There were no photographs in 1744. Polydactylism could look like this. This is a very bad picture. I don't even know why. Maybe that's a picture from the story. I don't know. But modern polydactylism is not as uncommon as you would think. As a matter of fact, in Mrs. Keene's niece's husband. Yeah, so Mrs. Keene's sister's daughter's husband. They have 3 kids. They live in another part of the country, but his family is apparently related to somehow to that Amish family. They're not Amish now, but he's a firefighter up in Ohio. He was born with an extra finger or toe, I don't remember, and one of his kids was born. He has 3 kids. One of them was born with polydactylism, born with extra toe and or fingers, and they just surgically remove the extra one. So imagine if you didn't have a weird thumb here, I don't know. Imagine you just remove the pinky, and it's typically not a fully formed pinky, it's typically a little tiny thing. Anyway, they remove it, and nobody will ever know. You might not even have a scar at such a young age. So don't always represent the genetic diversity of their sources. Here's another one. Fishing villages near Lake Maracaibo in Venezuela have more people with Huntington's disease than anywhere in the world. Huntington's is a devastating autosomal disease that leads to the deterioration of nerve cells, slowly, autosomal dominant disease, eroding control over bodies. So the symptoms begin between 30 and 50 years of age and leads to death within 5 to 10 years. So, let me just see something. Yeah. That's just another example. So here's a question. In 17, this is where we're going to stop. This is our last slide, obviously. Stop sign. In 1780, the human population of Pingalap, it's an atoll in the Pacific Ocean, was wiped out by a tsunami. We discussed this already in the genetics unit. As few as 20 people survived one of whom was the king. The king was colorblind and passed this trait onto many descendants. This island is now known as Colorblind Island. It's a sex-linked trait. Remember that? What type of genetic drift is this an example of? The key is most, look back in your notes, most of the population was killed off. What is that called? Bottleneck effect. Okay? So that may be a question or a similar question on an upcoming test or the EOC. Questions like this. Okay? That's our notes for this part. Part 6 will be coming up later this week, and that's our last one.